I'm about to try something that, on paper, really shouldn't work. This ring is tiny. It doesn't even make it past my first knuckle. It's a size 4, but I somehow have to size it all the way up to an 8.5, more than doubling its size. This should be fun. Strap in. Normally that wouldn't sound too crazy, but this isn't a normal ring. The entire shank is a braided sandwich of 3 different metals: platinum, rose gold, and yellow gold. My client inherited it from her mom, and she said it was made in Iran in the 1970s. The bottom looks like it's heavily worn and flooded with solder, possibly done at a later date to increase its durability. The top is a halo of diamonds surrounding a 4-carat star ruby. It's got this optical effect called asterism, which makes the 6-pointed star glide across the surface as the stone moves around. Now, if I try and stretch it as is, the whole top could compress inward, putting a ton of pressure against the stone. And if it doesn't break, it certainly won't sit centered anymore. So, out of an abundance of caution, I'm pulling out the ruby. Because the prongs were already on the thin side, I'm going to go ahead and unsolder them from the ring. But don't worry, I'll be replacing them later on. Before I take it into heat, I'm applying a coating of boric acid and denatured alcohol. This protects the ring from oxidizing. By the way, I just opened up channel memberships. If you've ever wondered about all the strange lighters I've been showing in my videos, that's where you'll find full breakdowns about each one of them. Plus you get bonus repairs and early access to new videos. Your support quite literally fuels my lighter habit. Now, back to the video. With the prongs removed, I don't plan on leaving this space empty. So I'm going to grind away the leftover solder so that the opening becomes a perfect circle. I need to temporarily hold this shape the way it is, so in its place I'm going to put in this round disc that I found in my gold scrap. It just so happens to fit perfectly. I'm not going to solder it in or anything, just going to tack it in place with a few zaps from my laser welder. This way it can just pop back out when I'm ready to reset the ruby. And with that, I'm ready to cut this thing open. Since I've already annealed the ring, it should stretch pretty smoothly. I'm using a ring stretcher for this because it applies even pressure all the way around, whereas ring bending pliers only push on one spot at a time, and they usually leave little tool marks where the jaws bite into the metal. When I check the size of my mandrel, it stops at an 8, but you can see there's these little gaps along the sides, so to get the real size, I use a paper mandrel. The paper flexes and fills those gaps, which gives a much more accurate reading on rings that aren't perfectly round inside. For the base of the shank, I'm going to use a piece of 18 karat sizing stock. This one happens to be about 150 years old, but old gold is still gold. It's a bit too thick though, so I cut it shorter and then thin it down in my rolling mill. However, compressing the gold makes it really stiff and brittle, so before I can curve the piece to fit the ring, I have to anneal it to soften it back up. Basically I heat the metal until it's a dark cherry red color, and then when it cools back down, the grain structure is realigned. Now it should bend smoothly instead of cracking. I need to trim it down once again, so I lay the piece under the gap and I spray it with this stuff called seat check. Wherever the piece doesn't get coated is where I need to cut, and then once I'm done, the paint just rinses right off. It's really cool stuff. Let's take a look at how that fits. And very nice. Again, I coat the ring with boric acid and alcohol before soldering. This is what makes the flame turn green when I hit it with the torch. Since I'm going to be adding more layers on top of this piece, I'm using a higher melting point solder for now. That way, when I solder with medium or easy flow on top of it, the foundation won't come undone. Remember, this is just filling the bottom of the ring. I still have a lot more to add on top to match the pattern. After soldering, everything goes straight into the pickle pot. It has a heated acid which dissolves the boric acid in flux and eats away at any surface oxidation. It's basically like a metal spa treatment. To blend the new piece to match the contours of the inside of the ring, I start with a carbide cylinder burr. It removes a lot of metal very quickly, and because it's carbide, it almost never gets dull. I think I've been using this same one for about 3 or 4 years. For the more delicate shaping, I switched to hand files, and for the inside of a ring, a half-round file is really the only one that makes sense. Next up, it's time to round out the shape. I absolutely do not want to leave hammer marks on the braided design, so I'm using a rawhide mallet. The face is soft, so it moves the metal without leaving little impact scars all over the surface. I'm a little bit under on the size though, so thankfully I left plenty of room on the base to stretch out a quarter size and reach my target of 8.5. Alright, so I know these steps are all pretty straightforward for a resize, but after I file down the top side of the base layer, things are about to get way more intricate. To match the two-tone braid, I need a combination of yellow gold and rose gold, so I melted down some 18 karat yellow scrap, grabbed a piece of rose gold sizing stock, and now I've got two chunks of metal that both need to be formed into something usable. The problem is they're way too thick, so I run them through my rolling mill until they're around 1.5 millimeters square. Originally I thought maybe I'd use actual braided wires to weave into the design, but because the bottom of the ring is so flooded with solder, that'd just be a waste of time. So I figured my best option is to carve out the details from a solid block of gold. I cut the square rods and laid them out flat, alternating yellow and rose colors like a little gold candy bar. Then I bond the whole thing together with a medium flow solder. I know it looks a bit rough right now, but that's to be expected. Most of these surface details are going to get carved away. And besides, if I ever needed the stripes to be truly crisp, I'd run the rods through a square draw plate to get those edges laser straight. Next I trim it into a rectangle so the stripes sit at an angle. You'll understand why when you see it on top of the ring. The thickness is right on the money, but now I need to curve it and trim out 2 slices before it gets soldered to the ring. After I slide it in the opening, I tacked it in place with my laser. Now I can plot out the exact sizes of the sections I need. I use a pair of dividers to follow the borders of each part of the design. Then I use my jeweler's saw to carefully cut along those lines until I'm left with 2 pieces of the stripe pattern. You know what's crazy is I think I started with enough gold to cover my monthly rent, all just to end up with these 2 tiny sections. I'll go ahead and tack those in place too. Now that I've got the stripes done, I can trim away the outside edges of the base layer. I first used a round burr, but I realized that would erase too many details around the corners, so next I switched to my microfiler to take care of the rest of the fine-tuned removal. I should probably mention that everyone always asks me what happens with the gold dust, and the answer is really simple. I sweep it up and save it to be melted down and refined. Almost all of it gets recycled. To get the platinum rails to fill the gaps, I have to draw out my wire a bit thinner. And to fit it nicely between the stripes, I'm going to flatten the sides ever so slightly in the rolling mill. Next, I'll curve it along the top and bottom with my shank bending tool. And then to get the pieces to the right size, I'm going to use my dividers again to measure the length from my cuts. I use a separating disc here so I can angle the ends. This way I have room for when I use my laser to connect them. Watching them perfectly press in and line up is so satisfying. You know, it's almost like the same feeling you get when placing the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle. It's really starting to come together. So I am a little bit worried about how splotchy these welds are looking, but that's something I can hopefully clean up once I'm ready to carve into the design. Once I've got all 6 connections fused, I went ahead and tacked on some yellow easy flow solder in between all the seams. This way when I heat from the bottom, I can watch the solder flow into all the gaps to seal everything up. There were still a couple openings though, so I added 2 more pieces of solder and I finished up with the torch. I know it looks like a hot mess right now, but just wait till the end. There's still a lot more work to be done. I've got to smooth out and line up the outside edges and the inside of the ring. For this, I use some low grit sandpaper wheels to take down some of the bulk on the stripes and rails. I work my way through finer and finer grits until I'm ready to polish inside of the ring. I like to use a felt mounted wheel with some red rouge compound to get a really good shine on the inside. Now I'm ready to pop out the disc I added in the top. It served its purpose well. Thanks, little guy. I'm going to grind out all the old solder that was holding the original prongs in place. Clearing that out lets my new ones sit perfectly flush against the halo before I solder them in. Now, I did consider using platinum for the new prongs, but platinum solder melts at such a high temperature that I'd risk scorching every diamond in the halo. And with stones this small, 1 second too long with the torch and they'll get cooked. So instead, I'm making the smarter choice: white gold prongs. To reset the star ruby, I begin by making a few starter cuts with a heart burr. Once the outline is set, I switch to a modified ball burr that better matches the round shape of the stone. That lets me grind right up to the tips without overcutting. It's an old trick I learned back in jewelry school. Shout out to Blaine Lewis. Next up, I polish the inside of the prongs, and now I'm ready to reset the stone. I lock it in with this brass prong pusher. It always looks like a tiny little foot kicking the prongs into place. Brass is too soft to scratch gold, but it's still strong enough to do the job. Then I round out the tips with a twin cut cup burr. Next up, I polish the top section of the ring with this goat hair brush. The rose and yellow gold stripes already look beautiful, but the original ring didn't use stripes. It used braided wire. So now I have to carve an illusion of braids into the metal. It's easily the most time-consuming part of the whole project, but it's also the most satisfying. I begin by recutting the platinum rails with a diamond-sintered disc. Then I sketch the whole pattern using a sharpened carbide scribe. I don't want to go into the next step blind. I did try and use gravers to first carve out the details, but the lines were coming out way too sharp for a 50-year-old ring, and it just didn't match the weathered look of the design. So instead, I switched to a 1/4mm ball burr. It's about the size of a poppy seed, cut in half. Carving with this thing is oddly therapeutic, but it's a long and slow process, so I've sped up the footage by about 20x. Finally, my work here is nearly complete. For the finishing touches, I'm just going to lightly polish the ring. I don't want to bring it to a full mirror shine. If I do that, I'll end up erasing too many of the little details that I spent so much time putting in. And now, for everyone's favorite part, watching all that polishing compound melt away. When I pull it out of the ultrasonic, that's when I finally get to see the ring the way my client will. All the little details I stressed over suddenly pop out like they were there the whole time. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and become a channel member if you want a bit extra. Thanks for watching.